Good afternoon. Welcome to our conversation about broadband access, which my panel has renamed high-speed internet access. I'm going to introduce our panelists right now, starting with Michael Pegues, the CIO, the City of Aurora. John Paul Farmer, the President of WeLink Cities. Joshua Edmonds, the Director of Digital Inclusion, City of Detroit. And Andy Berke, our Special Representative for Broadband from the U.S. Department of Commerce. Welcome to our panelists. My name is Nicole Brisbane. I am the founder of NB Impact Strategies, a small boutique consulting firm that mainly advises philanthropy on how they can impact opportunities in the social space with their philanthropic dollars. Additionally, I adjunct at Columbia Law at the Center for Public Research and Leadership, where we bring business, law, policy, and education graduate students together to solve problems and challenges in the public space. One of them is making sure that schools and students across our cities have access to broadband internet, especially in the wake of the recent pandemic. So I'm going to let our panelists go ahead and start by introducing themselves and tell us a little bit about their work, and then we'll jump right into the content. Michael, do you want to get us started?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. So Michael Pegues, Chief Information Officer at the City of Aurora. That's Aurora, Illinois, not Aurora, Colorado. It's the second largest city in the state, but second to none. I've been at the city since June of 2017. Came from the private sector. I remember it was Mr. Sankey, the CIO from Atlanta, said if he could have did it again, he probably would have went to the public sector first and then went to the private sector. And I feel the same way because I feel like I've been there about 10 years. Right? But I run the IT department for the City of Aurora. It is an enterprise shop. It's cyber, data and analytics, PMO. We also have a broadband, high-speed internet divisions, infrastructure and operations, and I know I'm forgetting something here, but I'm working at the City of Aurora because that's my hometown, and the mayor asked me to join back in 2017, so I'm here to drive social impact in the community.
Hi, folks. I'm John Paul Farmer. I'm the president of WeLink Cities, and until the beginning of this year, I was the chief technology officer of the City of New York. In that role, one of the things that I'm proudest of doing, and has really had a lasting impact on my life and the career path that I've taken since, is the Internet Master Plan that we developed throughout 2019, released in January 2020, and then just 2 months later, the pandemic hit New York City with full force, and suddenly the argument that we were making of, hey, the internet is essential, that wasn't a debate that we had to have anymore. Suddenly everybody understood. When kids needed to learn from home, when people needed to be able to work from home, when people needed to be able to get telehealth, when people needed to attend religious services, even funerals. Suddenly all these things had to be enabled by this foundational technology that everybody needed to have. We had a plan in place, which put us, I think, a little bit ahead of the game, but then we still had the challenge of implementing. And I think that's a challenge that New York City and every city around the country are still feeling their way through. Exactly how do you make a more competitive broadband marketplace where you can create affordability? Because certainly in rural areas, there is often an access challenge. In cities, it's mostly an affordability challenge. And that exists partially because of decades of underinvestment in certain communities. Digital redlining, if you look at a map of where internet adoption is lowest in American cities, it's going to look a lot like a racial map. And that's something that is finally being addressed. So I feel very fortunate that I was able to find a company in WeLink, which is a 4-year-old broadband technology startup, millimeter wave breakthrough technology that's doing ultra fast and ultra affordable. And those two things don't usually go together, ultra fast and ultra affordable. So we can create true digital equity so that everybody can have gigabit speeds and we don't create tiers and classes of internet for different segments of society. I was fortunate to find a company that had the technology, but also leaders like Kevin Ross, who's the founder and CEO, who's not just an expert in the space, but cares deeply about connecting people to opportunity and wants to make the investments as a company and ensure that we're doing that. So we've issued a challenge over the course of this summer to invite companies through essentially, to invite cities through essentially a reverse RFP to talk to us about how we can best partner. How can we be an excellent private sector partner to address where need is greatest in American cities, and then to ultimately grow and serve everybody. So I'll leave it there, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, all right. Joshua Edmonds, I'm the Director of Digital Equity and Inclusion for the is someone clapping for me? Yeah. Oh, wow. Wow, thank you. Woohoo. But yeah, so I'm the Director of Digital Equity and Inclusion for the City of Detroit. I've been in that role for about 4 years now. And if you're doing the math, that is before the pandemic, obviously. And so I went from getting a resident a hotspot and a computer as, that's digital equity, to now all of a sudden, if I did no. And so it's been really interesting to see how 2019, all of what we were doing in the city of Detroit was just on awareness. Us just doing a digital inclusion week, us trying to do a Speed Up Detroit campaign on speed testing. Then 2020 happens. We responded to the pandemic. We gave out essentially 52,000 computers to our public school students. In addition to that, we took about 36,000 tech support calls from families that year. I mean, it was a year just really in response. Then, last year we really focused on the emergency broadband benefits / affordable connectivity program. And we're one of the number 2. I think we're the number 2 metro area in the country on signups there because we had a real grassroots strategy in signing people up. And now all of a sudden we're doing a municipally owned fiber optic open access network. And if you look at that trajectory, I want to be very clear when we frame digital equity in the context of Detroit and what we're doing. It is a leading edge conversation, not a bleeding edge one. And the difference there, it's really going to lie in our convictions and what we believe is the right thing to do, not even for the moment, but for the future. And so at one point, again, you hear me talking about awareness. That was right for the future. But now you hear me talking about open access fiber optic infrastructure. That's not a follow the money conversation. That quite frankly is a manifestation of the values that we have in Detroit correlative to our response and community engagement around organizing principles. I'll share a little bit more about that later on, but it's obviously a pleasure to be here and be with these other esteemed panelists too.
Thanks so much. I'm Andy Berke. I'm the Special Representative for Broadband. I don't have the clapping that Joshua has. I might storm off the stage in protest. Oh, no. You gotta fish for whatever you can get up here. This is a transformative moment in the world of high-speed internet, and the innovations that we've heard from our last 3 panelists show that. One of the reasons is because we are going to think about internet differently going forward than we have in the past. In the past, it's been a luxury that some people had and some people didn't, depending on where you lived and who you were and how much money you have. Now it is thought of much more like water or roads or electricity. And a big piece of this is because of the leadership of President Biden. President Biden has pledged that every American will have access to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet. And really importantly, and rarely in 2022, a bipartisan group of legislators in Congress has funded that to the tune of $65 billion. We've just never seen anything like this before. And at the Department of Commerce, we are charged with making sure that we fulfill that vision alongside other portions of government. I know how important this is because I used to be the mayor of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Many of you know that story, but we were the first gig city, a fiber optic network to every single home and business for 600 square miles. We used that to power our economic growth, had one of the highest wage growths in the country. In 2020, Forbes said we'd be the #1 place for new jobs. And then we were also one of the first places doing digital equity at the beginning of the last decade. And one of the proudest moments that I had while I was mayor, just before I left office, we became the first community in the country to do free ultra-high-speed broadband for every family with a child on free or reduced lunch. So this is one of the biggest challenges of our times, and it's great that we are having a conversation here about how we can move this ball forward in every community, because that's what it's going to take to fulfill the president's vision of every American having access to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet.
Awesome. Can we give our panelists a round of applause as we welcome them to the stage? See, everybody gets the applause now, Andy. We're going to start with you, Michael. In our prep call, you talked a little bit about the plans Aurora has for the first true smart city, the 605 Innovation District. Can you tell us a little bit more about that initiative?
Right. The initiative itself, the 605 Innovation District, it's basically a lot of cities have maybe a 2 square mile and a specific area within their city where they focus on innovation. But what we're looking to do in the city of Aurora is basically make the entire city an innovation district. And a lot of that is predicated on our broadband infrastructure, because the city of Aurora is about 200,000 the population. It's 45 square miles. It sits in 4 counties, right? So it is a lot of sprawl, right? We have our broadband network, which is about a 40-mile ring, about 110 miles of laterals. It also interconnects in 2 locations to the county network, which stretches another 55 miles north. And also, we have a lateral downtown Chicago to what's called the Equinix Data Center, which is the telecom hub for the Midwest. So we take that 605 innovation, which really 605 is basically the first 3 numbers of our 5 zip codes at 6050. Oh my God, I don't even remember the zip codes. 60506, 60504, so forth and so on. So we just took the first 3 prefixes and said, we're going to make the entire city an innovation district based on our broadband infrastructure, right? As of today, we serve non-for-profits, we serve schools, we serve hospitals, we also serve the private sector, but we don't serve the residents. And that's what we're looking at doing now. We have 64,000 residential homes, and right now we're in the middle of a plan to basically build out and pass every home in the city of Aurora. And they will be subsidized as well. So Mr. Berke is someone you want to talk to because he's got a direct channel to the funding that's coming down.
Awesome. Joshua, we're going to go to you next as our other city representative here. I heard you talk a little bit about community organizing, and I wonder if you talk to us about the role community organizing plays in the work you're doing in Detroit, but also specifically as it relates to bridging the digital equity divide.
Yeah, so there are a lot of conversations around what digital equity is. Maybe not a lot of conversations about what it isn't, because then you would be challenging what people think it is. And so when we started doing our community organizing work, this goes back to 2019, it's similar to you all using the zip. So we started Connect 313. And Connect 313 has about 650 members, and really the criteria is you got to live in Detroit, work in Detroit, or learn in Detroit. And essentially what that does, it allows us to move with one brand. I cannot believe I'm about to quote Drumline here, but one band, one sound. It was that idea behind Connect 313 because I kept seeing nonprofits doing their own theory of change and digital equity, someone else doing something over here, someone else doing something over here, and what we looked like was we were off beat, no rhythm. And so establishing Connect 313 to be the value shop, where we essentially said, I'll give you 2 values that we use a lot in Connect 313. One, we progress at the speed of trust, meaning that there's not going to be an intervention that we're going to throw out there that people don't trust. And I think that's where people essentially go foul when they think about their broadband networks or any type of tech solution. If there's not trust built up, well, then you're making a real faulty assumption that people are going to take technology that they don't trust. And then the second one is we say locally led, expertly informed. Those values, when you put them in action, would cause you to have to organize. And so when you say digital equity, if you were talking about digital equity and there's no organizing behind it, I don't really know what you have. But I would say that's probably not really digital equity. It could be a really good platitude. And so we recently signed an engagement with 270 Strategies. They're the folks who essentially taught us how to do better organizing. So they said, how do you take all of your 650 members that you have here, how do you then look at your values that you have, and then how do you look at all this funding that's coming down to ensure that the values are then going to be instilling whatever solution that you all come up with. And so you heard me open up with, we're doing a fiber optic open access network. We did a 60-question survey and use actual political phone banking, any type of tool we could get to statistical significance, and we found 83% of Detroit residents believe that Detroit needs to build a public high-speed infrastructure to lower costs. So now what do? We organize off of that, and now we're a responsive government, and that's where the organizing play really comes in. And so I would say that if anyone's doing anything in the realm of digital inclusion or digital equity, if you're not organizing, I'm not saying that you're not doing digital equity, I just don't know what I would call that. And so we make it very clear that organizing is a big focus of our work moving forward. And quite frankly, if it wasn't digital equity, if it was water equity, we'd be doing the same thing. And so for anyone who wants to kind of look at a solution, I would say the bridge that you're going to cross is the organizing bridge, and that's what we've been able to cross.
Awesome, thank you. John, I know your work is closely connected to work with cities and localities. Tell us a little bit more about WeLink and the role that you see the company playing in creating digital equity.
Absolutely. So, one, I want to just agree with everything that's been said so far. I know it's boring when everyone agrees on a panel, but sometimes people are saying things that just make sense. When I look at what WeLink's doing, I try to make sure that we are a mission-driven company that's actually doing the things that I would have wanted to see when I was working in government. And when my job was to help solve these problems, I really wanted partners. I really wanted private sector companies that would come up and step up and bring new technologies and new approaches and do that in collaboration. So that's what we're trying to do. We've got some advantages that are really important, and this is what makes it possible for us to operate this way, because you kind of question, why hasn't this been done already? You know, let's look back the last decade. Why haven't people already solved these problems? And there are a bunch of reasons, but one of them fundamentally is that there wasn't a business case that allowed for true digital equity. Now, I'm not really getting into yet the work that needs to be done on coalition building, on trust building, et cetera, but just the foundational connectivity layer has to be there first. And you have to wrap that up with devices and with digital inclusion, digital literacy. Everything has to go together. What we've got that we bring to the table is millimeter wave. So if it's been a while since folks have looked at the spectrum, this is very high frequency, higher frequency than what's out there today, which has pluses and minuses. It means that it can go very fast, but it also doesn't go very far. So it's propagation limited. So what we do is not going to be the right solution for, say, a rural area. But for a dense urban environment or fairly dense suburban environment, what we have can allow us to deploy our networks at a cost radically cheaper than fiber, yet still fiber-like performance. So we're doing gigabit speeds. We just, in the last few weeks, have started doing multi-gigabit speed, symmetric. And so for families that are in need, who are eligible for the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is a fantastic initiative from our federal government that's doing a $30 a month subsidy for folks making less than 200% of the federal poverty line. There are other ways that you can qualify as well. But basically, this is the group that's most in need. This is the group that's been overlooked and where the companies have not stepped up and provided affordable solutions. We're making an absolutely free gigabit speed package available to them. And that's because we don't want to create different tiers. We don't want to create an underclass of people who can't afford the best. We want to make sure that we build our network in such a way that we can serve everybody. And it's a real game changer. And we know that we're not doing it alone. We know we're not going to solve the problem everywhere, but we think we're a really important puzzle piece. And that's why I chose, when I left public service, to go to a private company where I felt like I could continue to have a real positive public impact.
Thanks, John. Andy, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the policy landscape, sharing with us what you've seen happen at the federal level or at even a local level that has really advanced this work for its residents.
Well, great. And I've actually spent the last 5 minutes trying to think of a way to top a drumline reference, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do that. So I'll just give this answer the best that I can. So I'll make a different reference, which is there was an old House of Representatives speaker named Tip O'Neill, and he used to say that all politics is local. So let's say all digital equity is local instead. And this goes along with some of the things that Michael and John and Joshua were talking about. So the way to start with this is that to understand what currently exists, especially on the funding side, because that's a place where I can speak authoritatively right now, and that is we have this $30 voucher that goes to any family that doesn't make 200% of poverty or more. That's an amazing benefit. And because the president and vice president gathered most every one of the big providers at the White House a few months ago and got them to agree to take that $30 voucher, that means that anybody in that category can get 100 download speed for free. An amazing step towards digital equity. The second piece to this is that there's $2.75 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law to do digital equity work. And the previous, if you summed up all the previous years of digital equity work, you would end up with zero. And now we have $2.75 billion. As somebody who spent much of the last decade running around talking about digital equity, I feel like this is a monstrous step forward. And so we have a better setup today to do this work than ever before, but it happens at the local level. As Joshua just said, it's the people gathering up families and organizing to get the signups for the Affordable Connectivity Program, that voucher, because if the federal government puts the money out there, that doesn't instantly mean people end up with a $30 product. They have to still sign up and go through a lot of work. We have $2.75 billion for digital equity, but that doesn't mean that people will just magically receive tablets and skills and their internet will become more affordable. In Chattanooga, what we did was we partnered with churches and local groups and everyone else to do skills in neighborhoods. So how to turn on a computer, how to make sure that you knew how to put together an email address for you and your family, how to connect up with the people who you loved. This is part of the work. And so as a policymaker, you have to understand that we have to empower these communities to do the work that allows them to take advantage of this money and to realize that particularly in 2022, internet connectivity is not just about that outlet in the home, because if you can't afford to turn it on, or you don't have a device to connect to it, or you don't have the skills to use it once you turn it on, then you haven't really done very much. And so for us, it's about attacking this, and it looks different in Aurora and New York City and Detroit because it's all local.
So this is a question for any of you to jump in on, but I wonder if somebody wants to get the conversation started about some of the barriers to getting this work done on a local level.
Government. And it's the bureaucracy that goes with it. I think that's one of the main barriers, and the way we've actually tackled that at the City of Aurora is we have a community ISP, internet service provider, called OnLight Aurora. It is legally separate from the city, and the city actually basically leases the excess capacity on our broadband network, and then OnLight sells it to the residents. To the commercials, to the entities, to the schools, to the hospitals, so forth and so on, and then just pays the city back a revenue stream. I think that government itself is great at convening. There's the policy piece, and they can, get the dollars to help to subsidize and pay for it. But me personally, and this is my own personal opinion, I don't think the government should be running a broadband network. I think it needs to be through some type of public-private partnership, and you have strategic partners that basically focus on delivering the service, operating the service, doing the construction, engineering, build, repair, and everything, right? Because those companies can move a lot more nimble than a government can. So I would say, again, that the government, we're our own worst enemies, especially within this space. And I don't mean going to, to the big ISPs. Sorry, I hope none of them are in here. But I'm talking about the mid-tier ISPs, the community ISPs, right, that have partnered with the city to close that digital divide and deliver those services to the underserved community and also to the rural communities, because there's two aspects of that as well.
I don't disagree. I'm not going to say, I know when you looked over, yeah, I get it. And, even our model, we're not operating, we're owning the asset. I do believe that's where governance need to be right now. absolutely need to own that asset. If that's public money, that should be going to pay for public infrastructure for public good. That's the straight line across. However, as I would even say that there's two other contributing factors here. On one hand, and this is not a shot at academia, I promise it's not, but I remember when people were asking us, how do we get people enrolled in the Affordable Connectivity Program? And I mean, there was just like theories and debate and all these other things. I'm like, we're almost over-academicizing the issue. To put it plainly, when Amazon had the Fire Stick and it was hot, and you went to all these barbershops, there are certain people laughing because you guys know what I'm talking about. You went to these barbershops and they had jailbroken Fire Sticks. And they're going around saying, hey, this thing gives you all the movies that you want, all the TV shows, and you just plug it in and it's free. It's like, okay, now hold on. There wasn't some massive outreach program that Amazon sponsored. It was because what they had was so valuable that the value was already communicated and that people took advantage of it. And so now this makes you question what is being pushed out there and the value of that. And so I'm more so saying that when we over-academicize something, it almost leads to stagnancy. And people don't know where to act, and they don't have the certainty needed to act. I think the other point of this equation is we've somewhat, and this is not a shot at nonprofits either, I promise you, nonprofits and academia, I love you all. But on the nonprofit sense, we've taken the issue like the digital divide, and we've allowed people to essentially at times show up, and all because it's a nonprofit, all because it's new, and we're not necessarily operating with the standard of excellence. And so what you do then is whenever we have these interventions, we're trying to roll them out, it's almost eroding trust in the community, which makes it that much harder when we come around the second time to actually say, oh, no, this time we're for real. And this time it's a white glove service that's going to guarantee this, this, and this. That legacy of people not necessarily having the resources to actually get people online in a meaningful fashion has now hurt us as we're now trying to reach households and saying, we're serious this time. They can't tell the difference between the last 10 times someone said that they were serious and the 11th time that we're now knocking on the door.
So I'm going to twist your question just a little bit, if that's okay, and talk about the challenges in the way that they're currently melting away at least a little bit. And I want to talk about three of them. The first is data. We always have a problem with data, especially in an area that's as new as digital services and digital equity. We just don't have that 50-year legacy that we have in some other places, and so data is an issue. But there's all kinds of ways that we're solving that, including, if you look right now, the Federal Communications Commission is doing a parcel-by-parcel map of the United States and the internet speeds there. Now, that's not an easy project. I wouldn't advise anybody do it at home, but that is important data that we need to solve these problems. The second piece is resources. This is always a problem, especially in something that is as new as the work that we're talking about, but $65 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law. States and cities are using American Rescue Plan dollars to do this work. Resources are going to continue to be an issue because as you do more work, the cost of the materials and the cost of labor rises. You have problems with workforce. We're working on all those different issues, but those will continue to be issues. But we're chipping away at them as a country. And the third is the most important one to me, and that is political will. Actually, the number one reason that we haven't solved these problems before is because we haven't had the political will to solve the problems before. And to have a bipartisan group of people in Congress, again, very rare thing, say this is one of the issues that we're going to elevate to the top. To have the President of the United States for the first time say, this is my pledge, every American will have access to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet. To have Republican and Democratic governors, mayors of all political stripes working on these issues. We have to keep that together. We can't lose that piece. But the political will to decide this is what we want to do, that is critical for us to make progress.
So to answer this question, I want to revisit what's the core challenge in American cities in this space, and it's a lack of competition. The fact of the matter is we've got monopolies and duopolies that are putting up barriers to entry. I live in Manhattan. I've got one option for internet. It's the cable company. I have no other choice. And so I'm a price taker. And so if we want to serve people who are middle class, people who are lower income, we've got to create choice and options for them. And we've got to work as governments to bring down those barriers to entry, to think about what we can do to support either homegrown alternatives, co-ops, nonprofits, but also bring in startups and internet service providers from outside of these markets to create new competition. And I think there are several things that cities can do. It's fantastic that open access, neutral host fiber networks are being created in cities and states across the country. That's still going to take some time to really bear fruit, but that's a terrific direction ahead. There are also a bunch of assets that cities and counties and states have. Rooftops on buildings, poles, street furniture. We can be a lot more creative, and not just creative, we can be a lot more streamlined in how we make those available to the companies that are willing to meet the needs that that city has. So you don't have to just say, it's a free-for-all. Anybody out there can take these. You can say, here are the standards. We want to make sure you're serving people with certain speeds, certain quality. You're perhaps reaching certain communities that we know are most in need. Those are the kinds of things that cities and states can lead with right now, today. And we're seeing more and more of that happening, but I think that's very much a tool in the toolkit for how government cannot take over the broadband marketplace, but can create a much healthier, truly competitive broadband marketplace relative to what we've had in recent decades.
Thank you, John. Joshua, I may or may not have known somebody who did Fire Stick jailbreaking from the city of Detroit, but that's a story for another day. So I wonder if you could just piggyback on John's point about that competition and how you all have been thinking about that in your sort of recent processes in sort of creating that local competition and spurring some of those local providers to get into the game.
Yeah, so one, absolutely to all the questions and answers that were reframed for the last bit, because it does segment nicely. When we did our survey, we did ask residents, one, like, what are your biggest issues with internet? What are the barriers? And yeah, choice absolutely came up. People are like, we don't have a choice. We are essentially handcuffed to the providers. And so if tomorrow the big ones wanted to say, we're increasing everything by $100, what power does the municipality have? What power does any local community have at this point? So we're powerless, we don't really have choice, and essentially people are saying it's too expensive and the low-cost programs don't have enough bandwidth. And so going back to the Fire Stick example, why would someone sign up for something and essentially pay into it if they're not really going to get a demonstrable ROI? It doesn't make any sense. And so the minute we started talking about the language of choice, we realized that if we did fiber, that makes the most sense. More stable infrastructure. It's future focused. And then if we did open access, we the public sector don't have to pick a provider here. We can just say, hey, everyone earn your business. Look at every single one of the households in Detroit. Now you guys got to earn it. Now it's no longer just because you fall on this side of the street, you get this one option. You fall on this side of the street, you get this other one. It's like, no, everyone start from zero, earn your business. If I had to call you and I'm on hold forever, and I can't even understand what's being said on the phone, those are concerns that are being brought up at our community meetings that we said, okay, now all of a sudden, we the city aren't going to tell internet providers how to operate. We're just going to say, we are going to de-risk the investment, we're going to lay the infrastructure there, and then you all can earn your business, which then allows the consumer to essentially choose. And so when we started thinking about digital equity, we didn't want it just reflected in our computer programs, in our digital literacy programs, in our tech support programs. It should be reflective of all those things and our infrastructure. And so now that we have a choice model that is brewing, it has now allowed other small and medium-sized internet providers in Michigan and in the region to say, all right, I'd jump on that network, and I'd see if that can grow my footprint. And once we are moving in that way, we're now seeing our bigger providers saying, well, we're going to expand fiber everywhere too, which we're not sad about that either. It's like, great, you guys are expanding fiber. That's what we wanted. And then after they expand that fiber, our hope and desire is that choice is still going to be at the center of everything that we do moving forward on the infrastructure front.
All right, gentlemen, we are wrapping up with one final thought here. You've got a room full of people who either work in government or work in private sector, and they are trying to encourage their local governments to deal with high-speed internet in the same urgency they do as other public works and other infrastructure issues. How would you encourage them to talk about this issue, to motivate their local policymakers and their other government entities to really close the gap on the digital divide? And Michael, I'll start with you.
I've been doing this for the last 5 years since I worked at the city government, and it's really just about engagement, right? We know that fiber is the fourth utility, right? As Mr. Berke said, it is not a luxury, it is a necessity, but you got to get out and engage community, you got to gauge the mayor's office, you got to gauge the elected officials to show the value of it, right? And you got to have a strategy and you got to be able to execute. And I always say that, strategy without execution is aimless, but execution without strategy is actually pointless, right? So you got to have a strategy and you got to be able to execute, but you got to get the buy-in from your community, the elected officials, right? Your aldermen, the chief of staff, the mayor's office, and the constituents at large.
Nobody can solve this problem on their own. No one company, no one government, no one sector. It's got to be a cross-sector, collaborative approach because we've each got something to offer. And I think that some of the things you heard today are really exciting changes to how the public sector is operating, both at the federal level and the local level. And at WeLink, we're here to partner to bring what we can to the table, which is groundbreaking millimeter wave, gigabit speed networks, and to roll those out quickly to frankly spend our own money. We've raised hundreds of millions of dollars. We're looking to spend that to serve communities in need. And we can do that much, much faster when we're working collaboratively with government as opposed to simply going our own way. So I think that's the big takeaway for me is this is a collaborative effort. It's got to be a cross-sector effort. And the better we do that, the faster we're going to solve this problem.
So for those who are working adjacent to government or even in government who haven't articulated your infrastructure priorities yet, please do that as soon as you can, and absolutely do the community meetings. Those are going to insulate you and protect you. Make sure you got residents calling, showing up for public comment, that anytime there's anything that's on the docket that's touching infrastructure whatsoever, make sure that you got residents, type out a script and give it to them. Make sure that they're calling. Make sure that people are, when the FCC implements that challenge process, that they're queued up and they're ready to challenge. And I think that when you have an engaged piece and it's actionable, it's practical, it's organized, that then allows you to de-risk the conversation for a mayor or anyone else to say, I can lean on this, versus if I do this, the big providers are going to slam me and no one's going to say anything.
So I've been in about 31 states in the last 7 months. I was in Mississippi giving out a grant to a school a month or so ago, and when I drove up to the parking lot, there was a sign that says, for best internet, park here. I went to Oklahoma, and there was a young man named Jimmy, and Jimmy told me that he had gone back to school. He was an older fella, and he wasn't able to graduate because in March of 2020, when the pandemic hit, he had no internet and couldn't take his exams online, so it took him another year. The internet is a tool. That's what it is. High-speed internet is a tool, but it is a tool that touches all of our lives. It touches our economic prosperity. It touches our relationships. It touches our entertainment. It touches our quality of life. And so if people understand that if you thought you could live without electricity today, if you thought you could live without water today, if you thought you could live without roads today, this is part of our life just like internet is. And we have to be fired up in every community. The president understands this. This is why, again, he thinks this is part of his legacy, and it's at the top of the agenda. And we have to put it at the top of our agenda everywhere, all across the country.
Let's give a round of applause to our experts. Thank you all so much. Go forth and get connected.